Hello and welcome to Minute Mysteries. Today we will be reading our shortest story yet. It is filled with suspense and twists. Now we begin. The Last Portrait.
Detective Sarah Chen had seen plenty of locked room murders in her 15 years on the force, but none quite like this. The victim sat perfectly upright in his leather chair, a half-finished oil painting on the easel before him. Brush still wet with crimson paint clutched in his lifeless fingers. What made her blood run cold wasn't the scene itself. It was the painting he'd been working on. It was a portrait of his own murder. The call had come in at 6:47 a.m. Mrs. Eleanor Blackwood, housekeeper to renowned artist Vincent Carrera, had arrived to find her employer's studio door locked from the inside. When she finally convinced the building superintendent to break it down, they discovered Carrera dead, apparently from a single stab wound to the heart. "No weapon," Officer Martinez reported, consulting his notepad. Door was locked from the inside, key still in the lock. Windows are painted shut, haven't been opened in years, according to the housekeeper. The skylight's been sealed with metal bars since a break-in attempt last year. Sarah studied the painting more closely. It showed Carrera himself, terror etched on his face, as a shadowy figure approached from behind with a knife raised. The brushwork was hurried, desperate even, yet unmistakably Carrera's distinctive style. He painted his own death, Martinez whispered. Apparently. Sarah turned to Mrs. Blackwood, who sat hunched in a corner chair, her weathered hands trembling around a cup of tea. "Tell me about yesterday evening." "Mr. Carrera was expecting visitors," the elderly woman said, her Scottish accent thick with distress. "His nephew Michael and that gallery owner, Ms. Winters, they were coming to discuss his upcoming retrospective." "What time did they arrive?" "Michael came first, around 7. Then Ms. Winters, perhaps half an hour later. I served them dinner in the dining room. Mr. Carrera insisted I stay late to prepare his grandmother's recipe. Beef Wellington it was. And after dinner, they went to the studio. Mr. Carrera said they needed privacy to discuss business matters. I finished cleaning up and left around 10 o'clock. They were still in there, voices raised, arguing about something." Sarah made notes. "The front door locks automatically when it closes." "Yes. But both Mr. Michael and Ms. Winters have keys. Mr. Carrera gave them to family and close business associates years ago." Within the hour, Sarah had Michael Carrera and Diana Winters sitting in interview rooms downtown. She decided to start with the nephew. Michael was 32, expensively dressed, with his uncle's artistic hands, but none of his talent. He ran an art supply store that, according to his financial records, was hemorrhaging money. "Uncle Vincent was going to save my business," Michael said, fidgeting with his wedding ring. "The retrospective at the Metropolitan would have brought in serious money. He promised to loan me $50,000 to keep the store afloat. But you were arguing last night." Michael's face darkened. He changed his mind, said the art world was becoming too commercial, that maybe it was time for our family to step away from it entirely. Can you believe that? $50,000 means nothing to him, but it's everything to me. "What time did you leave the studio?" "Around 11. Diana left first, maybe 10:30. Uncle Vincent was still alive when I left, I swear, angry, but alive." Sarah studied him carefully. "The door locks from the inside. How did you get out?" "There's a trick to it. You have to hold the handle just right while turning the key, or it won't catch properly. Uncle Vincent showed me years ago when I was a kid. The lock's been temperamental for decades. Diana Winters painted a different picture. Elegant and sharp-eyed, she ran one of the city's most prestigious galleries and had been planning Carrera's retrospective for 2 years. Vincent was having second thoughts about the show, she admitted, her manicured fingers drumming against the metal table. He'd been acting strange lately, paranoid, thought someone was trying to steal his work. Steal his work how? He claimed someone had been in his studio, moving things around, touching his paintings. He was convinced someone was trying to forge his signature style. Diana shook her head. Honestly, Detective, I think the isolation was getting to him. He'd been living like a hermit since his wife died 3 years ago. What happened during the dinner meeting? Vincent announced he was canceling the retrospective. Just like that. 2 years of planning, contracts with the Met, international loans arranged, all down the drain. I tried to reason with him, but he was convinced that showing his work would somehow make it easier for forgers to study his technique. And Michael was furious. He kept talking about money Vincent had promised him. It got quite heated. I left because I couldn't stand listening to them anymore. What time was this? 10:30, as I told the officer earlier. Michael was still there when I left, still arguing with his uncle. Sarah returned to the studio, studying the scene with fresh eyes. Something bothered her about the painting. She called in forensics photographer James Liu. Jim, I need you to photograph this painting from every angle, then compare it to examples of Carrera's other work. Pay special attention to the brushstrokes and color application. While waiting for the analysis, Sarah examined the rest of the studio. Carrera had been prolific. Dozens of canvases lined the walls, depicting everything from city landscapes to abstract compositions. But one corner drew her attention. Several paintings had been turned to face the wall. She flipped them around and felt her pulse quicken. They were all portraits of people she recognized. Michael, Diana, Mrs. Blackwood, even the building superintendent. But there was something unsettling about them. Each subject was depicted with subtle signs of deception. Shifty eyes, false smiles, hands positioned to conceal something. Her phone buzzed. Chen here. Detective, it's Liu. You need to see this. The painting of the murder. It wasn't done by Carrera. Sarah's mind raced. You're certain? Absolutely. The brushwork is skilled, but it's an imitation. Someone else painted this. Someone who studied Carrera's technique closely, but couldn't quite replicate his pressure patterns and color transitions. It's a very good forgery, but a forgery nonetheless. Sarah stared at the canvas with new understanding. If Carrera hadn't painted his own death, then someone else had. Someone who wanted it to look like a supernatural premonition or the ravings of a paranoid old man. But why? She called Mrs. Blackwood back to the studio. You mentioned that Mr. Carrera thought someone had been in his studio, moving things around. Oh yes, it had been going on for weeks. He was quite upset about it. Did he mention anything specific that had been moved? Mrs. Blackwood nodded vigorously. His paints, mainly. He said someone had been using his pigments, mixing colors on his palette. He was very particular about his workspace, you see. Everything had to be just so. When did this start? About a month ago. Right around the time he decided to do those portrait studies. She gestured toward the paintings Sarah had discovered. He said he wanted to really study the people in his life, to understand their true nature through art. Sarah felt the pieces clicking into place. Mrs. Blackwood, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think very carefully. Yesterday evening, when you left at 10 o'clock, are you absolutely certain that all three of them were still in the studio? The old woman's brow furrowed. Well, I heard voices. Mr. Carrera and Mr. Michael, certainly. But now that you mention it, I'm not sure I heard Miss Winters specifically. The walls are quite thick, and they were speaking in hushed tones by then. Sarah thanked her and immediately called for Diana Winters to be brought back in. This time, she approached the interview differently. Miss Winters, I need to clarify something about last night. You said you left at 10:30 because you couldn't stand the arguing anymore. That's correct. But Mrs. Blackwood left at 10 and heard voices in the studio after that. If you left at 10:30, that means you stayed for another 30 minutes after she was gone. What happened during that time? Diana's composure cracked slightly. I may have gotten the time wrong. It was a stressful evening. Or maybe you never left at all. Sarah leaned forward. Maybe you hid somewhere in the building and came back later after Michael had gone. That's ridiculous. Why would I do that? Because Vincent Carrera discovered something, didn't he? Something about your business practices. Maybe something about forgeries. Diana's face went pale, but she remained silent. Sarah pressed on. The painting of the murder wasn't done by Carrera. It was done by someone imitating his style. Someone who had been practicing in his studio for weeks, using his paints, studying his technique. Someone who had access to his workspace and knowledge of his habits. You can't prove any of this. Actually, I can. You see, the forger made one crucial mistake. The painting shows the murder from the victim's perspective. Carrera looking back at his attacker. But if Carrera was painting while being murdered, he would have been facing forward, toward the easel. The perspective is wrong because the killer painted it after the fact, trying to imagine what Carrera would have seen. Diana Winters stared at the table for a long moment, then slowly looked up at Sarah. You don't understand. Vincent was going to destroy everything. Everything? My reputation, my gallery, my entire life's work. Diana's voice became passionate, almost pleading. He'd discovered that I'd been supplementing some of the pieces in my gallery with high-quality reproductions. Not selling them as originals, mind you, just displaying them when the real pieces were out on loan or being restored. It's a common practice in the art world. But Vincent didn't see it that way.
He was going to expose me, said I was corrupting the integrity of art itself. He threatened to tell the board of directors at every major museum I work with. My career would have been over.
Sarah could see the full picture now. So you killed him and tried to make it look like some sort of supernatural occurrence. You painted the death scene to make investigators think he'd had a premonition, or that he'd gone mad from paranoia. I never meant for it to go that far. Diana's voice broke. I went back to try to reason with him one more time. I used my key to get into the building after midnight, when I was sure Michael would be gone. But Vincent was still angry, still threatening to ruin me. We argued, and he turned his back on me, dismissive. There was a palette knife on his easel, and I snapped. And then you painted the murder scene. I thought if it looked like he'd painted his own death, you'd think he'd gone insane with guilt over something, or that it was some sort of artistic suicide. I studied his technique for years. I thought I could fool everyone. But you couldn't fool forensics analysis. Diana nodded miserably. I suppose I was too distraught to paint properly. Vincent always said emotion shows in brushstrokes. As Diana Winters was led away in handcuffs, Sarah took one last look at the forged painting. The irony wasn't lost on her. In trying to imitate Vincent Carrera's artistic vision, his killer had created the very evidence that would convict her. Mrs. Blackwood was waiting in the hallway, her eyes red with tears, but her back straight with dignity. "Will you be all right?" Sarah asked gently. The old woman nodded. "Mr. Carrera always said that art reveals truth, even when people try to hide it. I suppose he was right, even about his own death." Sarah walked out into the late afternoon sun, thinking about truth and deception, about the fine line between inspiration and imitation. In the end, it wasn't the locked room that had protected Vincent Carrera's killer. It was the assumption that the painting at the crime scene was genuine. Sometimes the most obvious evidence is the most misleading, and the most artistic lies contain the seeds of their own destruction. The case would make headlines for months. Gallery owner murders artist, forges final painting. But Sarah knew the real story was simpler and sadder. Another life lost to greed, another truth revealed through art, another reminder that in her line of work, nothing was ever quite what it seemed.
As she drove home, Sarah couldn't shake the image of Vincent Carrera's portrait studies, those penetrating paintings where he'd tried to capture the true nature of the people around him. Perhaps he'd sensed the danger closer than anyone realized. Perhaps, in his way, he'd been painting the truth about Diana Winters all along.
The case was closed, but the questions lingered. How well do we really know the people we trust? And when does the line between admiration and obsession, between inspiration and theft, become too blurred to see clearly? In the end, Sarah reflected, Vincent Carrera had gotten his posthumous exhibition after all. Not in a prestigious gallery, but in a courtroom, where his final work would be studied not for its beauty, but for its lies. It was, perhaps, the most honest art he'd never intended to create.